So welcome to today's deep dive. I'm your host, and I'm really excited for what we're getting into today.
Hey there, I'm the expert for today's dive, and yeah, we have some seriously fascinating research notes to unpack today.
We really do.
Yeah.
So I want you, the listener, to just imagine playing a game, or, well, better yet, imagine participating in a really complex, deeply woven civic society.
Right, like a massive community.
Exactly. But a community where the rules weren't just, established yesterday. They weren't even ratified a century ago. We're talking about an intricate, demanding set of laws passed down for thousands of years.
Yeah, millennia.
And in this specific society, changing a rule, even a seemingly minor one, doesn't just feel like a quick administrative update. It feels like breaking a solemn, irreplaceable promise to your ancestors.
Which is a heavy thing to carry.
Huge. So today we're opening up a set of sources focused on Orthodox Judaism. But, and I want to be clear here, we are totally throwing away the superficial idea that this is just like old-fashioned Judaism or some quaint exercise in nostalgia.
Yeah, because it's not that at all.
Right. We're going to examine this as a legally binding, multi-millennial constitution, one that dictates almost every single minute of a practitioner's day. And we want to understand why this intense strictness is actually causing it to grow faster than any other branch of Judaism today.
Yeah, to truly unpack the material we have in front of us today, you really have to consciously abandon a very specific framework.
Okay, what kind of framework?
Well, if you grew up in or around the modern Western world, you've been deeply conditioned to view religion primarily through the lens of belief.
Like what you feel in your heart.
Exactly. We assume the center of any religious identity is this set of internal abstract doctrines, what you feel or what you agree with in your own mind.
Right, the whole I believe this to be true thing.
Right. But to understand Orthodox Judaism, the sources say you have to flip that entirely. We're looking at a worldview where action, law, and continuous disciplined practice are the supreme focus.
This is more about what you do than what you just think.
Basically, yeah. The system doesn't rely merely on what you believe. It's this all-encompassing, patterned way of life.
Hold on, let me stop you there. Because if practice matters more than internal belief, are you saying a person could theoretically harbor deep existential doubts about God, but as long as they do the rituals, they're still fine?
They're still considered a fully functioning member in good standing.
Yeah, that seems completely counterintuitive to how we usually define being religious. I mean, usually if you doubt, you're a bad religious person.
Oh, it is deeply counterintuitive to the Western mind.
Yeah.
But yes, that's essentially how the legal framework operates according to the notes. The sources clarify that human life in this worldview is understood as covenantal.
Covenantal, like a contract.
Exactly. Jews are called to serve God through mitzvot, which translates to commandments. So following these commandments isn't viewed as a personal lifestyle preference.
Right. It's not like deciding to be vegan or something.
No, not at all. It's not about how you're feeling on any given Tuesday. It's a binding responsibility inherited through the Jewish people. You can struggle deeply with theology.
You can have a crisis of faith.
Huge crises of faith. But you remain fully part of the community if you observe the laws. Keeping kosher, observing the Sabbath, participating in the communal rhythms.
Wow. That immediately reframes everything. We're moving from, what do I feel inside to what am I commanded to do?
It sounds less like a modern spiritual retreat and much more like a lifelong term of, well, military or civic duty.
A civic duty is a highly accurate way to look at it, actually.
Yeah.
And to understand how this highly disciplined civic duty functions today, we actually have to look backward.
Okay, let's go back.
Because, surprisingly, the term Orthodox itself, it's a relatively modern invention.
Wait, really?
Yeah. From its own internal perspective, Orthodox Judaism didn't begin as a brand new religion or some offshoot branch. From their point of view, it is simply the unbroken continuation of historic rabbinic Judaism.
Dating all the way back to Mount Sinai, right?
Right.
Exactly, to the revelation at Mount Sinai.
But if they view themselves as the unbroken continuation of a 3,000-year-old tradition, why do they suddenly need a new label? I mean, if you're just doing what your ancestors have always done, you don't usually rebrand yourself, you just call yourself Jewish.
Well, you don't need a specific boundary marker until someone tries to move the boundary.
Ah, good point.
For centuries, Jewish communities in Europe lived in relative isolation. They were semi-autonomous, governing themselves according to Jewish law. But in the late 18th and 19th centuries, a massive cultural earthquake hit Europe.
The Enlightenment.
Right, the Enlightenment. And alongside it, the Haskalah, which is the Jewish Enlightenment, European nations began offering Jews emancipation.
Meaning they could leave the ghettos?
Yeah, leave the ghettos, attend secular universities, and become integrated citizens of the modern state.
And, well, integration always demands a price.
Mm.
If you want to be a full citizen of a modern secular nation, you're inevitably pressured to drop the highly distinct separatist practices that make you stand out.
Precisely. And this is where the friction ignited. A movement emerged which would eventually become Reform Judaism, arguing that in order to survive and thrive in this newly open European society, Judaism needed to adapt.
They wanted to blend in more.
They wanted to reshape the religion to fit neatly into modern sensibilities.
The sources pinpoint a very specific flashpoint for this, actually. The early 19th century Hamburg Temple controversy. What exactly happened in that room that caused such a massive rupture?
So in 1818, reformers in Hamburg opened a new synagogue, but they implemented radical changes to the service.
Like what?
They introduced a choir and an organ.
An organ, like a church organ.
Yes, instruments traditionally forbidden on the Sabbath. And they began delivering sermons in German rather than maintaining the exclusive use of Hebrew.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But most crucially, they altered the text of the prayers themselves. They removed long-standing petitions for the Jewish people to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the ancient temple.
Wait, so they were essentially saying Hamburg is our Jerusalem now. We are Germans of the Jewish faith.
Exactly. They were redefining their ultimate destiny.
I can totally see how traditionalists would view that not just as a stylistic update, but as an absolute theological betrayal. They weren't just changing the music. They were rewriting the fundamental identity of the people.
And the reaction from the traditional rabbis across Central and Eastern Europe was explosive. They viewed these changes as a direct violation of halakha Jewish law and a severe corruption of core messianic beliefs.
They saw the threat.
Yeah, they realized the Enlightenment wasn't just an opportunity, it was an existential threat to the continuity of the law.
And this is where the name comes from.
Yes. The reformers began referring to the traditionalists as Orthodox. It's a term borrowed from Christianity, meaning right belief, and they often used it as a derogatory label.
Basically calling them backwards or stubbornly attached to the past.
Exactly.
So it was originally an insult. That has a fascinating historical irony. The term Orthodox was basically a defensive reaction against the Enlightenment. It's like how we didn't call it World War I until there was a World War II.
That's a great analogy.
They only adopted the label Orthodox when a distinct alternative appeared on the scene and challenged the baseline. But let me challenge that premise for a second.
Sure.
If they didn't have a specific name for themselves for thousands of years, does that mean they were completely unified before the Enlightenment? Or is orthodoxy claiming a perfectly unbroken chain that actually had a lot more fractures in it than they like to admit?
That is a critical historical distinction. Was the Jewish past perfectly monolithic? Absolutely not.
Right.
I mean, the Talmud, which is the foundational text of rabbinic Judaism, is literally an encyclopedia of fierce legal debates. Rabbis argued vehemently over exactly how to interpret the law. There were philosophical disputes, mystical movements, geographic divergences.
They fought all the time.
Oh, constantly. But, and this is the foundational difference, before the Enlightenment, those debates all took place within the framework of the law.
Wow.
Everyone agreed that Jewish law was divinely given and unconditionally binding. The argument was merely over how to apply it.
They were arguing over the interpretation of the Constitution, but nobody was suggesting they burn the Constitution.
Exactly the right framing. The reformers in Hamburg and elsewhere were, in the eyes of the traditionalists, suggesting that the Constitution itself was outdated and could be fundamentally rewritten or discarded by popular demand.
Which is unacceptable to them.
Completely. So, in response, the traditionalists had to actively fortify the walls. The research notes detail how they began building incredibly strong defensive communal institutions.
Building up their defenses.
Yeah, they doubled down on their own synagogues, established distinct rabbinic courts, and poured massive resources into yeshivot.
Oh, they're the schools, right.
Yes, institutions dedicated entirely to intensive traditional Torah study.
So if this 19th century pushback was all about protecting the tradition from the corrosive effects of modernity, we really need to understand the core mechanism they were protecting. Because reading through these historical accounts, it becomes glaringly obvious that they weren't just protecting a nostalgic culture.
No, not at all.
They were protecting a very specific concept of absolute authority.
Authority is the engine of the entire system. In Orthodox thought, the central, non-negotiable axiom is that God gave the Torah to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai.
Right.
But the crucial detail that outsiders often miss is that this revelation includes two inseparable parts: the written Torah and the oral Torah.
Okay, let's unpack that, because it is fundamental. Why would there be an oral Torah at all? I mean, if you're receiving divine instructions, why not just write everything down in one comprehensive document so there is zero confusion?
It's a good question. Think of the written Torah, the 5 books of Moses, as an incredibly terse, highly condensed legal code. It provides broad commands.
Use all the points.
Basically,
Yeah.
for example, it famously commands, do no work on the Sabbath day, but it never actually defines what constitutes work.
Which is a huge problem.
Exactly. If you just have the written text, you have no idea how to execute the command. Is walking considered work?
Does carrying a child work?
Right. Is lighting a firework?
Without a manual, the law is completely unplayable. Everyone would have a different interpretation of what work means, and you wouldn't have a cohesive society.
Precisely. So the Orthodox belief is that alongside that terse written code, an oral interpretive tradition was given simultaneously at Sinai.
So Moses gets both at the same time.
Yes. This oral Torah explains the mechanics, the parameters, and the application of the written laws. Over centuries, this oral tradition was meticulously passed down from teacher to student, memorized and debated. And eventually, to prevent it from being lost during periods of exile and persecution, it was written down. It became the Mishnah and the Talmud, which form the basis of halakha, Jewish law.
So when an Orthodox Jew looks at the law today, they don't see a dusty ancient text. They see a continuous, unbroken chain of transmission. It goes from Sinai to the ancient rabbis to the medieval codifiers, straight through to the rabbinic authorities making decisions today.
And because that chain is viewed as divine in origin, halakha remains unconditionally binding. It is not subject to wholesale revision just because modern social preferences have changed.
You can't vote to abolish a law just because it feels inconvenient in the 21st century.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't.
I want to go back to my earlier analogy about this being like a constitution, because it sounds exactly like a legal constitution where the Supreme Court has been in continuous session for millennia.
That's a very good way to picture it.
But here is where that friction between Western individualism and Orthodox legalism gets really intense. In the modern secular world, we're constantly bombarded with the message to find our truth or express our authentic feelings.
Oh, absolutely.
Authenticity is entirely about what is happening internally, but in this halakhic system, authenticity seems to come from discipline and repetition.
The psychological worldview outlined in our sources is fascinating, precisely because it is the exact inverse of modern expressive individualism.
Yeah. In the modern paradigm, you're supposed to feel your way into action. You wait for inspiration, and then you act. But the Orthodox halakhic framework operates on the principle that you act your way into feeling.
You build the muscle memory of holiness.
Yes. The central problem in human life, according to this perspective, isn't just a lack of education or a failure of self-esteem.
Right.
The problem is misdirected desire, the neglect of commandments, and the profound danger of drifting away from communal responsibility.
So humans are just prone to wandering off.
Exactly. Human beings are viewed as morally responsible creatures equipped with both noble inclinations and wayward, selfish inclinations. The goal of the religion is not to escape the physical body or reach some ethereal, purely spiritual state.
Like meditating on a mountain.
Right, it's not that.
It ain't.
The goal is to discipline the physical embodied life and sanctify it through constant obedience.
Which means we really need to look at how this absolute legal authority actually maps onto physical reality. Because if the goal is to sanctify daily life, it requires an immense amount of architecture.
It does.
According to the research, this legal system completely reorganizes a practitioner's time, space, and even their physical body.
It leaves almost no stone unturned. Let's start with how it maps onto physical space. Orthodox Jewish life is profoundly embodied. The concept of sacred space isn't limited to what happens inside a grand synagogue.
It's everywhere.
In fact, the home is arguably the primary locus of religious life. The kitchen, the dining room table, the bedroom, these are all highly regulated spaces governed by complex laws.
Even within the synagogue, the space is engineered differently than what a secular Westerner might expect. The sources detail the mechitza, the physical divider that separates men and women during prayer services.
You're right, creating a distinct boundary.
The physical environment is quite literally divided and structured according to ancient legal precedent to maintain focus. But while the structuring of space is interesting, The architecture of time in this system is what strikes me as the most radical departure from modern life.
It is relentless.
It is relentlessly structured.
Time is not merely a resource to be spent. It is a canvas to be sanctified. Let's just trace a standard day.
Walk me through it.
The moment an Orthodox Jew wakes up, there's a prescribed prayer to say before even getting out of bed.
Before your feet hit the floor.
Exactly. Then there are specific rituals for washing hands. There are 3 mandatory distinct prayer services throughout the day, morning, afternoon, and evening.
And those take time.
They do. And they require a quorum of 10 men, known as a minyan, to recite in full.
And that is just a random Tuesday. When you zoom out to the weekly cycle, the entire week is fundamentally a countdown to Shabbat, the Sabbath.
Shabbat is the crown jewel of this architecture of time. From sundown on Friday to nightfall on Saturday, the practitioner enters a state of profound separation from the mundane world.
It's a total pause.
It's a 25-hour period where all acts of creative labor are strictly forbidden. You cannot write, you cannot engage in commerce, you cannot drive a car, and you cannot operate electrical devices.
Okay, let's pause on that, because the electricity prohibition is usually where outsiders get totally tripped up. I want to throw a highly specific modern scenario at you based on the notes.
Bring it on.
Let's say you have an Orthodox Jewish medical doctor working in a hospital. It's 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning. A patient codes, and the doctor is needed immediately.
Okay.
Using the elevator requires electricity. Defibrillating the patient requires electricity. Writing a chart violates the prohibition against writing.
Right.
Does the system demand that the doctor stand by and do nothing because the law forbids it? How does a 3,000-year-old law handle a modern trauma ward?
That scenario highlights the profound sophistication of the halakhic system. The system is not a rigid suicide pact.
Right.
It's a meticulously ordered hierarchy of values. In Jewish law, there's a concept called pikush nefesh, which means the preservation of human life.
Pikuch nefesh.
Yes. The principle dictates that the preservation of a human life overrides almost every other law in the Torah, including Shabbat.
So the doctor doesn't just have a pass to break the law.
No, it is far stronger than a pass. The doctor is legally commanded to break the laws of Shabbat to save that life.
Wow, commanded to break it.
Exactly. It would be a severe violation of Jewish law to hesitate or refuse to treat the patient because of Shabbat restrictions.
Because life is the highest value.
The system is incredibly nuanced. It recognizes that the laws were given to live by, not to die by. But, and this is key, the moment the life-threatening emergency is passed, the restrictions of Shabbat immediately apply again. The doctor saves the life and then walks down the stairs instead of taking the elevator back to the on-call room.
That perfectly illustrates how a seemingly ancient code breathes and functions in real time. It isn't mindless adherence, it's a constant calculation of supreme legal values.
Beautifully put.
But the sheer volume of these laws, the dietary laws determining what animals can be eaten and how they must be slaughtered, the family purity laws dictating intimacy, the constant daily prayers, it brings up a massive psychological question for me. Think about the modern concept of decision fatigue. We spend enormous amounts of mental energy every single day trying to figure out what to eat, what to wear, how to find meaning in our careers, how to structure our weekends.
It's exhausting.
Exactly. Does the source material indicate that this relentless halakhic structure feels suffocating to the practitioner, or is it actually a cure for that modern existential exhaustion?
From the outside, looking at a list of hundreds of daily restrictions, it looks utterly exhausting. It looks like an unbearable burden.
Right, like being micromanaged by the universe.
Exactly. But the internal psychological reality detailed in our research reveals something entirely different. For the practitioner, the structure is not a cage. It is a deeply supportive scaffold.
A scaffold, I like that.
The text explicitly points out that meaning in this worldview is derived from belonging. You belong to God, you belong to the Torah, you belong to your family, and you belong to a historical community.
You never have to wake up and invent your own purpose from scratch. Your purpose is structurally assigned to you the moment you open your eyes.
Consider the immense psychological relief in that. The structure cultivates a very specific set of virtues: faithfulness, reverence, modesty, and communal loyalty. The individual ego is decentralized.
It's not all about you.
Right. You are part of a grand, sweeping rhythm, and this dense, highly regulated structure is precisely what makes Orthodox Judaism unusually durable as a sociological phenomenon.
It doesn't rely on the flimsy foundation of fleeting emotional inspiration.
Yeah.
You don't have to feel spiritual to successfully execute the laws of the day. You just have to do the work.
And importantly, the work is inherently communal. You cannot easily observe this religion in total isolation on a mountaintop.
Because you need the 10 men for prayer.
Yes, Shabbat requires community. You need the synagogue for public prayer. You need a network of kosher infrastructure for your food. You need schools for your children. The law literally forces people to live in close geographic proximity and interact constantly.
It embeds the religion into the inescapable fabric of daily social life.
Precisely.
Which naturally leads to an assumption that I think a lot of people make.
Yeah.
When you look from the outside at a group of people living this highly disciplined, tightly clustered, geographically dense life, it is very easy to assume they are a monolith.
Right, that they're all exactly the same.
You see the shared rules, perhaps you see distinctive modest clothing, and you assume they share an identical, uniform culture. But our sources shatter this myth completely. Orthodoxy is not a monolith at all. It is a vast, often deeply fractured internal tapestry.
This is a vital point to grasp for you listeners out there. Orthodox Judaism is organized around the shared boundary of halakha, not around a single, rigid cultural or philosophical ideology.
So the law is the only constant.
Exactly. Because the unifying factor is legal practice, it allows for wildly different cultural and social worlds to exist simultaneously within those legal borders.
Let's walk through these internal worlds, because the contrast is really stark in the notes. The text first outlines modern orthodoxy. This is a group that has made a conscious, strategic decision to engage deeply with the modern world while maintaining total halakhic fidelity.
Right. Modern Orthodox Jews actively participate in secular society. They attend secular universities, pursue professional careers in medicine, law, academia, business.
They're fully in the mix.
They are heavily involved in modern democratic politics and are overwhelmingly Zionist, deeply supporting the modern state of Israel. Their guiding philosophy is often summarized as Torah umada.
Meaning Torah and secular knowledge.
Yes. They believe that engaging with secular wisdom and the modern world actually enhances their religious life, provided it does not contradict Jewish law.
So you have a modern Orthodox professional working a high-stakes job on Wall Street, fully integrated into the corporate world. But come Friday afternoon in the winter, they're leaving the office at 3 p.m. before sundown to rush home, shut off their smartphone, and enter the Sabbath.
Right. They are straddling two massively demanding worlds.
And then you look at the other end of the spectrum within Orthodoxy, and you find a completely different strategy for survival. The Haredi or ultra-Orthodox communities.
Yes.
If the modern Orthodox strategy is engagement, the Haredi strategy is insulation.
Very much so.
Why do they feel the need to build such a high wall? What are they protecting themselves from that the modern Orthodox aren't afraid of?
Well, the Haredi worldview fundamentally suspects that modern secular culture is inherently corrosive to a life of Torah.
Corrosive.
Yes. They look at the rampant individualism, the shifting moral landscapes, the distraction of modern media, and they conclude that you cannot casually swim in those waters without eventually drowning.
So it's a protective measure.
Therefore, they prioritize strict insulation. They maintain distinctive, highly traditional dress, often the black hats and coats for men, and rigorous modesty standards for women. And it's not just for the sake of tradition, but as a deliberate uniform that creates a social barrier.
It's a visual boundary. It signals to the outside world, I am not part of your cultural ecosystem, and it constantly reminds the wearer of the same thing.
Exactly. Their communities are heavily focused on communal autonomy and place an immense, unparalleled emphasis on intensive Torah study, particularly for men, often continuing well into adulthood.
And they aren't big on secular education, right?
Right. They're generally much more skeptical of secular education, viewing it primarily as a functional tool for making a basic living, rather than something with inherent philosophical value.
But even within that insulated Haredi world, there's another major split that the sources highlight. You have the broader yeshiva world, which is intensely intellectual and focused on rigorous legal text study. But then you have the Hasidic communities.
Hasidic Judaism is a spiritually distinctive subset. It's rooted in an 18th century revival movement founded by a figure known as the Baal Shem Tov in Eastern Europe.
It was pretty radical at the time, wasn't it?
Very radical. It emerged in response to a feeling that the rigid, purely intellectual focus of the yeshiva world was leaving the common, uneducated Jew behind. Hasidism brought a strong mystical and spiritual emphasis to daily life.
And it changed the social structure entirely.
It did. Hasidic communities are centered around absolute devotion to a charismatic, dynastic leader known as the Rebbe.
The Rebbe.
Yes, the Rebbe is not just a legal scholar, he is viewed as a spiritual conduit for the community. Hasidic culture is famous for its joyful prayer traditions, its use of wordless melodies called niganim, and a rich tradition of mystical storytelling.
So you have the Lithuanian-style yeshiva student in one neighborhood whose highest ideal is silently parsing a deeply complex legal argument in the Talmud for 14 hours a day.
Right.
And literally a few streets over, you have a Hasidic gathering where hundreds of men are singing passionately around their Rebbe.
It's an amazing contrast.
And then we haven't even touched on the geographic diversity.
Oh, the historical geography adds an entirely separate layer of complexity. The divisions we just discussed, Modern Orthodox, Haredi, Hasidic, are primarily developments of Ashkenazi Judaism, which originated in Central and Eastern Europe.
Right.
But there is an entirely different world of Orthodox Judaism stemming from the Sephardi and Mizrahi traditions.
These are the communities that developed in the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, and across the Middle East and North Africa.
Exactly. Their historical trajectory was entirely different. They didn't experience the European Enlightenment or the trauma of the Holocaust in the exact same ways.
So they evolved differently.
Consequently, their legal customs, their liturgy, their musical traditions, and their approach to modernity have distinct flavors. For example, historically, Sephardi communities didn't develop the same extreme polarization between secular and ultra-Orthodox that plagued European Jewry.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, their traditionalism was often more fluid and integrated into everyday life.
So to say someone is Orthodox is effectively as broad as saying someone is European. It is a massive, varied umbrella. You have university-educated doctors, insulated scholars reading ancient texts, mystical communities organized around dynastic leaders, and distinct Middle Eastern traditions.
All under one roof, theoretically.
Yet, they are all bound together by the exact same legal constitution.
Which, as you can imagine, naturally generates fierce internal friction. Because they share the legal framework of mitzvah, they are forced to argue about how to interpret it in the face of new challenges.
And what kind of challenges do they argue about?
Oh, the sources detail intense internal debates. They argue over the kosher status of lab-grown meat. They argue over how to utilize the internet and whether smartphones should be banned or merely filtered.
That's a huge one right now.
Huge. They debate the religious significance of the State of Israel, the boundaries of women's roles in ritual life, and how much authority any one rabbinic institution should wield over the masses.
But the crucial takeaway is that the glue holding these incredibly different social ecosystems together is the shared commitment to the law itself. A modern Orthodox lawyer and a Hasidic rabbi might vehemently disagree on whether it is appropriate to own a smartphone, but they entirely agree that the laws of Shabbat are divinely mandated and absolutely binding on both of them.
That shared baseline is what defines the boundary of orthodoxy. And understanding how rigidly they define that internal boundary helps us understand how they draw their lines against the external world, particularly when interacting with other Jewish movements or those looking to join the faith.
Let's shift into that because the contrast with other movements is where the philosophical divide over authority becomes incredibly obvious. The sources provide a detailed comparative breakdown between Orthodox Judaism and the other major Jewish denominations in the modern world: Reform, Conservative, and Reconstructionist.
The dividing line between orthodoxy and all of these other movements always comes back to one central question. Does the traditional interpretation of halakha have absolute veto power over modernity, or does modernity have a vote in reshaping the tradition?
Okay, let's look at how the Reform movement answers that question. According to the research, Reform Judaism views Jewish law as largely non-binding or optional. The focus shifts heavily toward ethical principles, social justice, and personal autonomy. They argue that tradition can and must change significantly to adapt to modern life.
Right. And from an Orthodox perspective, the Reform approach fundamentally breaks the chain of Sinai. If the law is optional, it ceases to be a covenant.
It's just a suggestion then.
Exactly. Then you have Conservative Judaism, which attempts to occupy a middle ground. Conservative Judaism does view halakha as binding, but they argue that the legal system has historically evolved and should continue to evolve to meet contemporary realities. They rely heavily on modern historical and critical scholarship to reinterpret the law.
The sources give a brilliant, highly specific example to highlight this difference. The issue of driving to the synagogue on Shabbat. Why did this become such a massive dividing line?
Well, in the mid-20th century, as American Jews moved out of dense urban neighborhoods and into sprawling suburbs, they often lived too far away to walk to the synagogue.
Because you're supposed to walk on Shabbat, not drive.
Right. So this created a crisis. If they couldn't walk, they wouldn't attend services, and the community would dissolve. The conservative movement's rabbinic authorities issued a legal ruling permitting people to drive a car on Shabbat specifically for the purpose of attending synagogue.
Wow.
They argued that the overarching value of preserving communal prayer necessitated adapting the technical restriction against operating a vehicle.
So they prioritized the survival of the community over the strict adherence to the letter of the law regarding combustion engines.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the Orthodox response was an absolute, unequivocal no.
No debate.
No debate. In the Orthodox legal view, the prohibition against the type of labor involved in driving a car on Shabbat is a biblical mandate. You cannot violate a biblical prohibition simply to facilitate a positive commandment like attending a prayer service.
So what was the Orthodox solution to the suburban sprawl? If you can't drive and you live 10 miles away,
The Orthodox solution is that you do not change the law, you change your real estate.
you just move.
You buy a house within walking distance of the synagogue, and if you cannot afford one, you pray at home. The law is the immovable object.
That perfectly encapsulates the divide. Finally, the text mentions Reconstructionist Judaism, which views Judaism not primarily as a divinely revealed religion, but as an evolving cultural civilization created by the Jewish people themselves. Tradition is simply a community practice shaped by progressive values.
When you look at all of these movements together, you see why Orthodoxy maintains such a firm boundary. Orthodoxy views itself as preserving the authentic, unadulterated covenantal system. While they may view individuals and other movements as fellow Jews, they view the theological structures of those movements as fundamentally mistaken.
Because they reject or weaken the absolute authority of the halakhic chain.
Exact.
This firm boundary and this insistence on the heavy, binding nature of the law profoundly impacts their view on conversion, which I found really surprising. If I look at almost any other major world religion, Christianity, Islam, they have massive global mandates to proselytize.
They want to grow.
They want to recruit, they want to spread their truth to every corner of the earth. But the sources point out that Orthodox Judaism actively does not seek converts. Why?
It stems from a profound theological difference in how they view humanity's relationship with God. In many major world religions, the belief is that their specific path is the exclusive route to salvation. If you don't join, you are spiritually doomed. Judaism does not share this theology. The classical rabbinic tradition includes the concept of the righteous among the nations.
Meaning, you do not have to be Jewish to be considered a good, righteous person in the eyes of God.
Exactly. The belief is that non-Jews are only obligated to follow a basic universal moral code, often referred to as the 7 Noahide laws.
Which are things like what?
They include prohibitions against murder, theft, and cruelty. Simple, foundational ethics. If a non-Jew lives an ethical life according to those basic principles, they have a secure place in the world to come. Therefore, there is absolutely no spiritual mandate to convert the world to Judaism. God does not need everyone to be Jewish.
If God doesn't need everyone to be Jewish, and you already have an incredibly strict, demanding lifestyle, it really explains why the conversion process is so notoriously difficult. If someone does decide they want to join, what does that process actually look like?
It is intensely rigorous. The sources indicate that a legitimate Orthodox conversion takes anywhere from 1 to 3 years, and sometimes much longer.
3 years, just to join.
Minimum, usually. It is not merely a confession of faith. It requires thousands of hours of extensive study. The prospective convert must learn Hebrew, study the intricacies of kosher laws, Sabbath observance, and family purity. They must completely overhaul their lifestyle.
It's total life reboot.
And ultimately, they must stand before a Beit Din, a rabbinic court of 3 judges who must be absolutely convinced that the convert is genuinely committing to observing all the commandments for the rest of their life.
I have to play the skeptic here.
Go for it.
If I am an outsider looking at this from a purely organizational perspective, making conversion intentionally difficult seems like a terrible business model for the long-term survival of religion. Why put up a multi-year roadblock? Why actively discourage people who are expressing interest?
It seems counterintuitive until you remember the core premise we discussed at the very beginning. Judaism is highly unusual because it is simultaneously a religion and a people.
An ethnicity, a nation.
Yes. Converting is not just adopting a new theology. It is a legal naturalization process. You are taking on the immense legal liability of the covenant.
It is like applying for citizenship in a country that immediately drafts you into the most demanding, high-risk special forces unit. You don't just get a passport and a flag to wave. You get a massive list of daily, non-negotiable obligations.
That's a great way to describe it.
And if you fail to uphold them, you are actually spiritually worse off than if you had never joined in the first place.
That is precisely the rabbinic logic. Why encourage someone to take on the heavy burden of 613 commandments when they can achieve righteousness just by being a good, ethical non-Jew?
Makes total sense.
And yet, despite the roadblocks, people do convert. The sources outline why. People who endure this process are drawn to the profound structure. They are seeking religious authenticity in a modern world that often feels chaotic and rootless.
They want the discipline.
They are attracted to the intellectual rigor of studying the Talmud, the deep multi-generational community, and the profound meaning found in the discipline of sanctifying everyday life.
Okay, let's zoom out and look at the macro picture. We have an incredibly strict set of rules that governs every aspect of daily life. We have a massive multi-year roadblock preventing easy conversion. We have an absolute refusal to actively recruit.
Right.
And we have a modern secular world outside the walls that is constantly offering an easier, highly individualized, low-obligation lifestyle. Logically, from a sociological standpoint, you would expect this group to be rapidly shrinking. You would expect them to be slowly crushed under the weight of modernity.
Most sociologists did expect that.
Right. But the data we have shows the exact opposite. Which brings us to a phenomenon we have to explain: their demographic boom.
The statistics are staggering. Orthodox Judaism is currently the fastest growing segment of Judaism today, particularly in the United States and Israel. Our sources cite Pew Research data showing that while about 9% of U.S. Jewish adults identify as Orthodox, that number masks the true demographic momentum.
Because they're younger.
Yes, the Orthodox population is proportionally much, much younger than the non-Orthodox Jewish population.
And they aren't growing through mass conversion like we just established. They are growing internally through sheer demographic force.
Yes, the growth is driven by significantly higher birth rates. Large families are a profound cultural and religious norm, particularly in Haredi and Hasidic communities.
But high birth rates don't matter if everyone leaves when they turn 18.
Exactly. The second, and arguably more crucial factor, is their incredibly high retention rate. They are keeping their youth engaged.
How do you keep a teenager engaged in the 3,000-year-old legal system when they live in a world with social media and infinite secular entertainment?
You do it through massive, unparalleled investment in educational infrastructure. The Orthodox community has built a vast network of day schools in your shivit.
So they're insulated from day one.
A child born into the system is immersed in Jewish texts, values, and communal expectations from the moment they can speak. Their social world, their family world, and their intellectual world are seamlessly integrated.
It's a totalizing environment. But to truly understand this modern boom, the sources insist we have to view it through the lens of recent catastrophic history. The demographic vitality of Orthodoxy today is largely a response to the ultimate trauma, the Holocaust.
The Holocaust effectively destroyed the traditional centers of Jewish life, learning, and authority in Eastern and Central Europe.
It wiped them out.
The Great Yeshivot, the Hasidic dynasties, the centuries-old communities, they were annihilated. The survivors who arrived in the United States, Israel, and elsewhere after 1945 essentially had to rebuild a multi-millennial civilization from scratch, often in highly secularized environments.
There's a famous historical narrative about this. The leaders of these shattered communities arrived in America, and the established, secularized American Jews looked at them and thought, these are the last remnants of a dying breed. Within one generation, their children will assimilate and become just like us.
That was the absolute consensus among sociologists in the 1950s. They believed strict orthodoxy could not survive the allure of American freedom and capitalism. But those surviving leaders possessed an astonishing, almost defiant resilience.
They wouldn't budge.
They refused to compromise the halakha. They meticulously rebuilt the schools, the kosher infrastructure, and the rabbinic courts. They leveraged the very freedoms of modern democracies: freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, economic opportunity to fund and construct a parallel society.
And then, alongside the rebuilding in America, you have the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. This introduced an entirely new, incredibly complex dynamic. Suddenly, for the first time in 2,000 years, Jewish law wasn't just a theoretical text or a guide for a minority community in exile. It was thrust into the reality of a sovereign state.
The state of Israel forced orthodoxy to confront unprecedented modern realities.
Like what?
Well, how does an ancient religious law interact with a modern secular parliamentary government? What are the halakhic rules regarding serving in a modern military? How do you run a national electricity grid or a modern hospital system if labor is forbidden on Shabbat?
You can't just turn off the power grid on Saturday.
Exactly. How is Jewish identity legally defined for the purposes of immigration? These aren't abstract debates. They are the daily geopolitical realities of the Middle East.
And they don't all agree on the answers.
Not at all. You have the Haredi communities in Israel who historically resisted participating in the military, prioritizing full-time Torah study to spiritually protect the nation, which causes massive political friction with the secular majority. And then you have religious Zionists who serve in elite combat units, viewing the defense of the state as a profound religious commandment.
These geopolitical shifts forced orthodoxy to constantly adapt, argue, and solidify its positions. The tension between the ancient law and the modern state is a constant live wire. But this tension, ironically, keeps the system incredibly vital.
The constant negotiation with modernity is what makes it so resilient. You mentioned earlier that the system isn't a suicide pact, it prioritizes life. We see this in how they navigate modern medicine. They don't reject MRI machines or organ transplants.
They figure out how to use them legally.
They engage top bioethicists and rabbis to determine exactly how these modern marvels fit into the ancient legal framework. They don't blindly reject modernity. They meticulously filter it through the lens of the law.
And their booming growth is the ultimate proof of concept. The sociological data demonstrates that a highly demanding, legally structured, densely communal way of life is significantly more resilient across generations than a religion based solely on abstract, individualized belief.
Which brings us full circle to where we started. If you look at this through the Western lens of religion as personal feeling, the heavy demands of Orthodox Judaism seem impossible to sustain.
Yeah.
But when you realize it is a legally binding constitution, a patterned form of life that structures your time, your space, and your ultimate purpose, the demographic boom makes perfect sense. It provides an ironclad sense of identity in a world that is constantly shifting.
The key takeaway for anyone trying to understand this is that you cannot comprehend orthodoxy by just reading its theology. You have to observe the mechanics of its daily life. You have to understand the profound weight of the Sabbath, the intellectual intensity of the Talmudic debate, and the social fabric of the community. It is a living, breathing claim that the covenant made at Sinai remains absolutely binding right now, today.
Well said.
We have journeyed through a massive landscape today. We've seen how a term that started as a defensive reaction to the Enlightenment evolved into a booming, highly structured civilization. We've explored the unbreakable chain of legal authority, the sacred architecture of time, and the vast internal tapestry of communities from modern professionals to insulated scholars, all held together by the glue of the commandments.
But before we close, there is one final lingering concept drawn from the research notes on a personal perspective that I think perfectly encapsulates the internal psychology of this system. We talked about the virtues this structure cultivates: modesty, loyalty, reverence. But there is also a profound driving fear mentioned in the text.
It's not the generic individualistic fear of doing something wrong or facing personal punishment, is it?
No. For an Orthodox Jew deeply embedded in this life, the ultimate fear is the dread of becoming spiritually unmoored, and in doing so, being the link that breaks the chain. The fear is that your personal negligence or assimilation will actively help to dissolve the sacred inheritance of your people.
That is heavy.
The weight of that responsibility is staggering. You are not merely responsible for your own personal enlightenment, you are holding a literal link in a chain that stretches back 3,000 years.
You are carrying the legacy of ancestors who maintained this exact same law through exile, poverty, the Inquisition, and the Holocaust. To casually drop that inheritance because it feels inconvenient in the modern world is unthinkable within that framework. So here's what I want you to ponder today as you step back into the highly individualistic, belief-centric modern world. Think about the friction of your own daily routine. Think about the decision fatigue you face every morning. Now ask yourself, what would it look like? And how incredibly heavy, or perhaps how profoundly meaningful would it feel if your daily habits were not just about your own personal self-improvement? What if your choice is about what to eat, when to rest, and how to structure your day were literally viewed as the very mortar holding the structural integrity of a 3,000-year-old civilization together. It makes you look entirely differently at the rules of the game we are all playing and the promises we choose to make to the past. Keep diving deep.